I think the most striking thing about safe spaces is how unsafe they are, and how hostile and even violent they can be for people who hold unpopular views or who simply support the right of others to hold unpopular views. And safe spaces have spread across American and British campuses over the past few years, and they're always presented as these kind of happy, clappy, therapeutic zones in which students, particularly minority students, must be protected from gruff language and prejudicial ideas and so on. So one student union in Britain describes a safe space as a place in which students are free from intimidation and judgment and can feel comfortable. So they're always presented in this kind of inoffensive, Oprah Winfrey-like language as a kind of, a space in which you can be yourself without fear of ridicule. But in practice, they are ugly, authoritarian places, propped up by menace and often enforced by threats. That's the experience that I and others have observed. So I just want to give you a few examples from Britain over the past few months of safe spaces that are actually very unsafe if you don't think the right way. So last week at King's College in London, a pro-Israel student meeting was invaded by anti-Israel activists who smashed windows, set off fire alarms, threw chairs around, and shouted Nazis at the attendees of this meeting. I mean, talk about the irony of invading a meeting of largely Jewish students and shouting Nazis. Real self-awareness failure. And the key justification for anti-Israel, disrupting anti-Israel meetings is that these meetings are offensive and distressing to the student body, particularly those of Arab descent. In other words, these meetings violate the safe space. And so in the name of maintaining safety, meetings can be violently interrupted. It's extraordinarily Orwellian. War is peace, freedom is slavery, violence is safety. On two campuses in Britain in recent years, feminist students have burnt the literature of far-left groups, which they accuse of supporting rape apologism and contributing to an unsafe climate for female students. So they've effectively said these left-wing groups aren't very good on the issue of feminism, and therefore we must publicly burn their literature. So it's the use of fascistic menace in the name of maintaining safety for students. So again, the Orwellianism continues. At London University last year, the Iranian secularist Maryam Namazi was harassed and hectored and shouted at by a bunch of students from the Islamic Society who accused her of violating their safe space. Namazi is a stinging critic of Islamism. She escaped the Iranian regime. She thinks Islamism is a real problem. And what happened is that these big Islamic guys came along, barked at her, shouted at her, turned off her PowerPoint, harassed her, all while accusing her of violating their safe space. And you had this kind of Kafkaesque situation where a bunch of blokes can harass one woman in the name of preserving their safety. So they create a genuinely hostile environment in the name of maintaining safe spaces for students. And then in 2014, as Arlene mentioned, I was banned from speaking at Oxford in a debate about abortion on the basis that I am a person without a uterus, that is how they refer to me, and therefore it's not my business to talk about women's bodies. As it happens, I was due to make the pro-choice case and to argue against officialdom's authority over women's bodies and minds. And these 300 feminist students at Oxford decided that the debate would harm their mental safety. And so they threatened to turn up with instruments, that's the exact words they used, with instruments, and I don't think they meant trombones and violins, with instruments to disrupt the debate. So they didn't seem to notice the irony of threatening the physical safety of a debate in the name of maintaining their own mental safety. So again, you have that Orwellian contradiction. And the administration at Oxford caved into their demands and banned the debate, which I thought was shameful at one of the oldest, most prestigious universities in the world. And on it goes. Things are burnt, people are harassed, books, newspapers and songs are banned in the name of maintaining safety for students. So you have a situation where menace, fire, threats and censorship are deployed in the name of keeping students free from intimidation. It's just an extraordinary state of affairs. And on British campuses, the situation is much worse than it is in America. 30 student unions in Britain, 30, have banned Robin Thicke's song Blurred Lines because it makes female students feel unsafe. Some campuses have banned Mexican hats. I know there are similar developments here, on the basis that they create a hostile environment for Latino students. Some unions have banned the making of sexual noises in the student bar, whistling, growling, whatever young 19-year-old boys do when they've had 7 pints. They've banned the making of sexual noises on the basis that they make female students feel unsafe. And of course, in American campuses, we've seen recently the harassment of professors, the barging of journalists off campus, the use of menace in the name of maintaining the sacred safe space. In a nutshell, the perverted rallying cry of today's student radicals is, you make us feel unsafe and therefore we will destroy you. And I think the fact that safe spaces can generate so much unsafety is really revealing, because what I think it speaks to is the iron fist of authoritarianism that lurks within the velvet glove of the self-esteem movement. I think it really speaks to the dark side to the culture of therapy, and to the idea that has grown in recent years that an individual's sense of self-worth overrides everything else, including freedom of expression. And I think the motor of campus censorship today is a really profound feeling of psychic vulnerability among students. They seem to see everything as a threat to their mental safety and their mental health. Statues of old, dead white men, novels that have references to sexual violence, pop songs, everything seems to be interpreted as a wounding thing, something that could harm them. And I think this is really summed up in the idea of microaggressions, where even innocent everyday conversation is reframed as abuse, as an attack, as a peril. Even having a conversation becomes difficult. The students at Oxford who are currently campaigning to take down a statue of the old colonialist Cecil Rhodes describe the statue as an environmental microaggression. So even inanimate objects, buildings, the university quad, everywhere you go, everything you look at is interpreted by these students as a threat to their sense of self and self-esteem. It's this kind of extreme psychic vulnerability, which I think really suggests that we're entering a new era of censorship. We had ideological censorship, which was the elevation of one political system through the suppression of others. We've had religious censorship, which was the elevation of one particular belief system through the use of blasphemy to crush others. Now we have therapeutic censorship. Censorship designed to protect an individual's sense of self-worth. A very narcissistic form of censorship, I think. It's a tyranny of self-regard. This idea that you have the right to crush anything that makes you feel bad. It's extraordinarily arrogant. It's almost as if students think that they all deserve their own blasphemy law. They're like, they're like little Jesuses, all demanding protection from offensive ideas and threatening menace against anyone who defames or blasphemes or hurts them in some way. And so just finally, I want to say that the important thing to recognise, I think, is that these students, these little tyrants, are not entirely responsible for this culture. I think they are the product of a broader culture that has been growing for decades. A culture of diminished moral autonomy, a culture of fragility, a culture of therapy, a culture which says that self-esteem is more important than the right to be offensive, a culture, in fact, that the older generations developed, including some of the 40-somethings and 50-somethings currently getting their rocks off by attacking these tyrannical students, and I count myself in that group. I think this culture grew up under an older generation's abandonment of the idea of rigorous academic study, abandonment of the idea of freedom of speech, and cultivation of a new culture of therapeutic vulnerability and fragility. So I think, yes, let's keep on criticising students who want to ban hats and ban songs and ban sexual noises and police student sexual behaviour. We should criticise and mock them. But I think we have to go further than that and restate the case for robust individualism, restate the case for moral autonomy, and restate the case for the ability of people to hear everything and not be instantly shaped or damaged by it, but rather be able to work out for themselves whether it's good or bad, right or wrong, and to survive that process. We need to remind students and everyone, including the older generations who nurtured all this nonsense, that the safe space is a trap. It provides you temporary relief from ideas you don't like, but at the expense of your own individuality, at the expense of your soul, and your ability to use your moral and mental muscles to decide what you think is right and what you think is wrong.
Woo!